supported the convening of an urgent meeting of the Security Council, which was requested by our colleagues from Belarus. It's on the theme of the Ukrainian attack drone strike against a bus which was transporting on the 17th of June of Belarusian children to a vacation in Gelendzhik. We would like to express our support and condolences to the representative of Belarus, to the UN, Mr. Rybakov, and through him to the people of Belarus and all of those who were wounded, and wish them a speedy recovery. The bus had 44 people, including 28 people who were students of the athletic school number 2 in Shlechice in Belarus, as a result of which a pregnant woman accompanying the group from Lugansk died. She was a mother of 2. 9 more people, including 6 minors, were wounded. According to the driver, several drones were flying over the bus before the attack. This is not a strike against a military entity with consequences for civilians, but rather an intentional undertaking by an operator who saw what the target was. This is an act of terrorism against civilians, and this was the qualification of this by the Investigative Committee of Russia. Investigative Committee of Belarus also started proceedings for which they traveled to the site. The Kyiv authorities, as usual, tried to shift the responsibility for this on our country because they called what happened a provocation or an information operation which benefits Russia, supposedly. But these insinuations do not withstand any kind of criticism and can be refuted by facts. At the place of attack, a number of pieces of evidence was found and shows that the drone was a Ukrainian one. The commander of the drone forces of Ukraine, Brovdi, and the head of Ukrainian intelligence were there. They were in charge of target acquisition and ordered the strike against the children. The perpetrators of attack are also identified. They work for the Chimera unit of a border unit of Ukraine, Mr. Tkachenko, a serviceman of a rapid reaction unit of Ukrainian border services, Mr. Zhukov, and a serviceman of the special operations of Ukrainian armed forces. Now, against all of these people are the subject of a decrees where they are given accusations under the accusation of terrorist acts against civilians. They are all announced to be searched for internationally. We are disappointed by the fact that the UN Secretariat is not principled enough to call a spade here and say that the people responsible for the tragedy in the Bryansk region is a regime in Kyiv. Instead of that, once again, what we hear from international bureaucrats are toothless comments about how it is unacceptable to attack civilians or civilian facilities. And behind these general formulations, what we see is political cowardice and a reluctance to see the crimes committed by Zelensky, even when the victims of such crimes are children. At the same time, any baseless accusations against our country are being picked up by the UN Secretariat instantly without any verification. We demand that the Secretary General and the relevant UN units unequivocally condemn these bloody crimes. Ignoring targeted strikes by Kyiv, resulting in numerous victims amongst children, is a very clear indication of double standards which violate the Charter of the United Nations. And this creates, with the regime in Kyiv, the feeling that they have complete and full immunity. And essentially, this is egging them on in their terrorist ambitions. Similarly, we call upon every responsible government to provide a very clear assessment of this and many other crimes conducted by Ukrainian neo-Nazis and condemn them publicly. Mr. President, this crime by the Zelensky regime is not just yet another episode of Ukrainian armed forces' terror against civilians. It is an illustration of their terrorist essence. Strikes against a dormitory in Starobelsk, against a bus with civilians in Yanakivo, against children in the Bryansk Oblast show that for the Kyiv regime there are no restrictions. Any person, including children who happen to be on the territory of Russia or who are transiting, are automatically a target for elimination. This regime made military crimes a part of their military strategy. They are hunting peaceful civilians down, as well as first responders who are trying to help those who are wounded or are trying to mitigate the consequences of an act of terror. This cynicism and nature is shown in the increased number of strikes against educational and children's facilities, especially during the spring and summer, where the exams are underway, competitions are underway, school proms, and other activities. When Western countries are appealing to international humanitarian law, colleagues, please remember that for those who were the acolytes of Nazis, for those who openly are glorifying the killers of Jews, Poles, and Russians, these kinds of acts are run of the mill by now, and they do not take into account any kind of an IHL. The Zelensky regime thinks that it is important for them today to show the successes of their armed forces, to make sure that there's more Western weaponry coming into the country and a great deal of money. At the same time, the Western sponsors of the regime consider the support of the regime as beneficial commercially and geopolitically. In reality, there are no successes on the front line, and the possibility of forcibly mobilize the Ukrainian armed forces is going down consistently. Therefore, the picture which is being painted by the mass media is only being fed by drone strikes against civilian targets. The strike of the UAV was a planned PR action can also be demonstrated by the fact that at the same time, essentially, there's a demonstrative attacks with the so-called Belarusian opposition. More than that, several days after this strategy, Zelensky issued a rude, aggressive ultimatum against Minsk and threatened that if ultimatum is not carried out, well, the Kyiv will have to take care of it itself. Several days later, however, the Ukrainian leader decided to backslide, and this shows yet once again how the low cost of those kinds of ultimatum. Well, this is no longer diplomacy. This is just blackmailing, trying to involve a sovereign state, the Republic of Belarus, into the conflict. The rhetoric of Kyiv about protecting Europe from Russia is nothing other than a smokescreen so as to prolong the conflict. And to continue hostilities until the very last Ukrainian and involving NATO in a direct confrontation with Moscow. Is anyone still doubting the true intent of Zelensky to broaden the geography of the conflict to the territory of Belarus, Poland, and the Baltic states? He's playing with fire. And the European countries should realize that their client has basically gone out of control. Let me also note that today, as opposed to the 20th of May meeting convened by Ukraine, Antonio Guterres did not come to the Security Council to say how worried he is about broadening of the conflict. Well, that's basically all we can say about how candid he is and how worried he is about the current situation and how impartial he is. Mr. President, for the period from the 15th to the 21st of June, 296 civilians were impacted by Ukrainian strikes. 47 people died, including one child. 250 people were wounded, including 20 minors. the civilian facilities on the territory of Russia suffered from about 5,000 rounds of ammunition. As a result of strikes in Moscow and the environs, an 8-year-old girl died. 23 civilians were impacted. In Zhukovsky, a drone struck a high-rise apartment and destroyed the balconies at higher stories. These were not strikes against military facilities, but rather against a dense metropolis and its suburbs. We are seriously concerned by the increasing terrorist attacks against Zaporozhye and the city of Energodar near it. As a result of a strike there, one person died. One more person was seriously wounded. The transport unit of the NPP was also attacked. It took no fewer than 14 drone strikes. A fire erupted. The area and the buildings there were severely damaged. There's no doubt here that these attacks are called upon to destabilize the work of a major nuclear facility in Europe and is another attempt by Kyiv to blackmail the region by the threat of nuclear catastrophe. The Western sponsors of the Kyiv regime understand very well that their weapons is not there to protect democracy, but rather to strike civilians and civilian facilities. But this inconvenient truth does not put them off in any way. New tranches of weaponry is being sent to Kyiv, and talks about protecting the territorial integrity of Ukraine are used only to serve as a screen for their own participation. On the 18th of June, in the NATO headquarters in Brussels, chaired by UK and Germany, another meeting of the contact group on defense assistance to Ukraine, the Ramstein group, took place. New supplies of weaponry was supplies, long-range weapons and drones. The most generous donor, yet once again, was Germany. They said that they were ready to allocate $400 million to buy American weapons and Patriots. The UK intends to send 752 million pounds sterling from Russian assets so as to manufacture drones and also provide air defense and radars. And the Netherlands are adding 500 million euros for air defense, and Belgium is promising the first 7 F-16s in 2026. This, as you can see, the peace agenda of the West in practice. Billions to arms corporations and rockets and drones to the Kyiv regime is how you can see them. In this room, the representatives of Western countries are constantly talking about the need to cease fire, present themselves as peace-loving representatives. Within the UN, now, this is perfectly fine. These are exactly the signals that non-Western countries are awaiting. They're not going to demonstrate their attempts to provide weaponry to Kyiv to support their military industry and preparing for war with Russia. Question may arise as to why most humanitarian appeals in the world are underfinanced, why peacekeeping and development efforts do not have enough money, whereas the drone technology from Ukraine is spreading throughout the world. But let's not think that the representatives of other countries are stupid. You cannot cover up the reality. All of these many billions spent on the war for Ukraine shows Europe's true colors. They are not a mediator, but the main sponsor of the continued war, who tries to use the language of ultimatum, threats, and political blackmail when talking to Russia. I now address myself to Western members of the country whose states manufacture and provide the Zelensky regimes with long-range weaponry, which is being used by him so as to strike against civilians intentionally. If you continue providing weaponry to Ukraine, well, you have become a participant in these many crimes, and you are held directly, politically, and morally responsible for them. Russia does not accept ultimatums. We do not succumb to pressure, and we will not have decisions imposed on us if they go against our direct national interest. In this current situation, we can see yet once again that the special military operation was justified. We are trying to put an end to the neo-Nazi regime, which for 8 years had been shelling Donbass and is now terrorizing all of the Ukrainian population, first and foremost the Russian speakers. Under these conditions, we will continue striking military facilities in Ukraine. 20th to 26th of June, in reaction to a terror attacks against the civilian facilities in my country, our armed forces struck 5 times against the military objects and facilities used by Ukrainian armed forces. We struck against the military industry, against the energy facilities and fuel storehouse and the warehouses for drones and the places for the temporary deployment of Ukrainian units and foreign mercenaries. In the night of the 26th of June, there was a group strike using precision weaponry, as a result of which the territorial center for the warehousing in Kyiv was struck, as well as the oil processing facility in Poltava Oblast. On the battlefield, our armed forces also are fully controlling the initiative. Mr. President, it would, of course, have been far preferable to attain the goals of the special military operations through political means, but the realistic solutions take into account the legitimate interests of Russia cannot be seen at present. So far, the intent of the Western countries to impose a strategic defeat on us remains unchanged, and for as long as that is the case, we will continue resisting those attempts militarily. We do have the political will and ways and means for that, and no one should doubt that for a second. I thank you.